The fist hit the door at 6:47 p.m. 3 hard knocks. The kind that rattled the hinges. The kind that made the Christmas wreath swing violently against the wood. Inside, Meredith Calloway froze mid-step. She had been carrying a tray of sugar cookies to the kitchen, the same recipe she'd made every December for 53 years. The tray slipped. Cookies scattered across the hardwood floor her husband Harold had installed in 1982. Another knock. Harder this time. "Open up, Mrs. Calloway. I know you're in there." The voice was male, impatient, cold. Meredith's hands trembled as she reached for the doorknob. She was 78 years old, 5'2", 118 pounds after a full meal. Her knees ached from arthritis. Her heart had been skipping beats since Harold's funeral 3 years ago. She opened the door. The man standing on her porch was tall, broad-shouldered, wearing a navy suit that cost more than her monthly Social Security check. His face was clean-shaven, jaw tight, eyes scanning past her into the house like he was appraising inventory. Dominic Brashford didn't wait for an invitation. He stepped inside, his polished shoes grinding cookie crumbs into the floor. 30 minutes, he said, not looking at her. His eyes moved across the room, the modest Christmas tree in the corner, the string lights Harold had hung in 1979, the ceramic nativity scene on the mantel. His lip curled slightly. "Disgust. Pack what you can carry. My team will handle the rest." Meredith's voice came out as a whisper. "I don't understand." "What's not to understand?" Dominic turned to face her now, holding up a folded document. He didn't hand it to her, just waved it like a prop. "Your lease ended. You ignored the notices. This is a lawful eviction." "But it's Christmas Eve. I'm aware of the date. I've lived here for 47 years. I raised my children in this house. My husband," her voice cracked. She pointed to the framed photograph on the coffee table. Harold in his Sunday suit, arm around her, both of them young. "My husband died in this house." Dominic glanced at the photo. His expression didn't change. "That's unfortunate. But it doesn't change the paperwork." Through the front window, Meredith could see a sheriff's deputy sitting in a running cruiser at the curb. The engine hummed. Exhaust fogged in the December air. The deputy stared straight ahead, refusing to make eye contact. Neighbors had gathered on porches up and down the street. No one approached. No one called out. In Cedar Ridge, everyone knew who Dominic Brashford was. His company owned half the rental properties in town. His name was on the donor wall at the hospital, the community center, the high school football field. You didn't challenge men like that. Not if you wanted to keep your own lease. If you've ever had someone you love treated with cruelty when they deserved nothing but kindness, drop a heart in the comments right now. This story is for you. Before we begin, drop a comment below with your country and what time it is right now where you're watching. Whether it's sunrise in Nairobi, midnight in New York, afternoon in Canada, or evening in France, I want to know. Don't just sit back, tell me where in the world you are. Now, let's dive into the story. Meredith lowered herself onto the arm of her worn couch. Her legs wouldn't hold her anymore. She clutched the photograph of Harold to her chest like a shield. "Please," she said. "I have nowhere to go. My daughter lives in Oregon. My son is—" She stopped. Swallowed. She had almost said it. Almost mentioned Gregory. But she couldn't. He had been through too much already. His wife's death. Raising those 2 girls alone. She refused to add her problems to his burden. "Your family situation isn't my concern," Dominic said. He was typing something on his phone now, already moving on to the next task, the next property, the next obstacle to be removed. "You have 28 minutes remaining." A locksmith appeared in the doorway behind him. Then a man with a clipboard. They moved through the house like ghosts, photographing rooms, marking items, preparing for the removal. Meredith watched them touch Harold's recliner. The one he sat in every evening. The one that still smelled like him if she pressed her face into the fabric. She didn't cry. She was too shocked to cry. Her body felt numb, disconnected, like she was watching this happen to someone else. On the coffee table, next to Harold's photograph, sat another framed picture. This one showed Meredith standing beside a younger man, distinguished, silver-haired, wearing dark judicial robes. Her arm was linked through his. Both of them were smiling. Dominic's eyes passed over it briefly. Something flickered in his expression. Recognition, maybe. Or the ghost of it. But before the thought could fully form, his phone buzzed. Another notification. Another deal. Another eviction. He looked away. 23 minutes later, Meredith Calloway stood on the sidewalk in front of the house she had called home for nearly half a century. A cardboard box sat at her feet. Photo albums, her Bible, Harold's watch, the ceramic angel from the top of the Christmas tree. The locksmith changed the deadbolt. The door closed. The Christmas wreath still hung there, swaying slightly in the cold wind. Dominic Brashford climbed into his pearl-white Escalade without a backward glance. The deputy's cruiser pulled away. One by one, the neighbors retreated into their homes. Meredith stood alone under the streetlight, snowflakes beginning to fall around her. At 11:47 p.m., she was still sitting in her car in the parking lot of Grace Methodist Church. The heat was blasting. Her tears had dried into frozen tracks on her cheeks. The box of belongings sat in the passenger seat. Harold's photograph stared up at her from inside. She had nowhere to go. She had no one to call. Except, her phone rang. The screen lit up with a name she had been avoiding for months. Gregory. Her son. The one she had protected from every hardship she could shield him from. The one who had just lost his wife to cancer. The one who was raising 2 daughters alone while carrying the weight of 1,000 cases on his shoulders. She stared at the screen. Her thumb hovered over the red button. Then, slowly she pressed green. Mom. His voice was urgent. Mom, I just saw your name on a court filing. Tell me it's a mistake. Tell me you're not sitting in some parking lot right now because a man named Brashford threw you out of your home on Christmas Eve. Meredith opened her mouth to lie. To say she was fine. To protect him one more time. But the words wouldn't come. Instead, for the first time in 3 years, she let herself break. And on the other end of the line, Chief Circuit Judge Gregory Calloway listened in silence as his mother wept. When she finished, he spoke only 6 words. Come to my house tonight, Mom. Then he added 7 more. And don't worry. I'll handle this. Gregory Calloway was still gripping the phone when the line went dead. He stood in his home office at 11:52 p.m., surrounded by case files that covered every surface. The desk, the chairs, the floor beneath the window. A half-empty coffee cup sat next to his laptop, cold for hours. On the wall behind him hung his law degree from Georgetown, his certificate of appointment to the circuit court, and a photograph of his late wife Rebecca, taken 6 months before the diagnosis. She was laughing in that photo. Her head tilted back, eyes crinkled at the corners. He couldn't remember what had made her laugh. He only remembered wanting to make her laugh like that forever. Now she was gone. 8 months in the ground. And his mother, his 78-year-old mother, was sitting in a church parking lot on Christmas Eve because some landlord had thrown her out of her home like she was garbage. Gregory set the phone down slowly. His hands were steady. His breathing was even. But something had shifted behind his eyes, a coldness that hadn't been there before. He pulled up the county court database on his laptop. His fingers moved across the keyboard with mechanical precision. Search, Brashford Holdings LLC. Filter, eviction filings, past 12 months. The results loaded. 47 evictions. 47 families displaced in a single year. And there, near the bottom of the list, dated December 23rd. Calloway, Meredith, property address, 412 Winthrop Lane. His childhood home. The house where he learned to ride a bicycle. The house where his father taught him to play chess. The house where he said goodbye to his dad for the last time, standing on that same porch, promising to make him proud. Gregory clicked deeper into the file. The eviction notice cited lease non-renewal. No violations. No missed payments. Just a corporate decision to remove a tenant paying below market rent. Legal. Technically legal. But Gregory Calloway had spent 22 years on the bench. He knew the difference between what was legal and what was right. And he knew that men like Dominic Brashford built their empires in the gap between those two things. Upstairs, his daughters were sleeping. Cecilia, 14, had stayed up until 11 waiting for him, asking if Grandma was coming for Christmas morning. Harper, 11, had fallen asleep on the couch clutching the stuffed rabbit her mother had given her on her last birthday. Gregory had carried Harper to bed himself, tucked the blanket around her shoulders, stood in the doorway watching her breathe. Rebecca should have been here. She would have known what to say. She would have handled his mother's situation with grace and warmth while he paced and fumed. She was always the calm one, the steady one, the one who could look at any crisis and say, "We'll figure it out together." Now there was no together. There was only him. He returned to his laptop and opened a new search, Dominic Brashford, personal. The results painted a picture Gregory had seen 100 times before. Self-made businessman. 17 properties. Regular donor to local charities. Photos at fundraisers, at golf tournaments, at ribbon-cutting ceremonies. The kind of man who smiled for cameras while his lawyers destroyed lives behind closed doors. Gregory scrolled deeper, past the press releases, past the promotional materials, into the court records. And there it was. A wrongful death lawsuit from 3 years ago, filed by the family of a man named Walter Pembroke, 69 years old. Evicted from a Brashford property in January. Found dead of exposure 2 weeks later in a homeless encampment under the Miller Street overpass. The case had been settled quietly. No admission of guilt. No public record of the terms. Just a sealed file and a family who had signed away their right to speak. Gregory printed the case number. Added it to a growing stack of notes. His phone buzzed. A text from his brother Owen, deployed overseas with Army intelligence, saw the news alert on Brashford Holdings. "What's going on?" Gregory typed back, "Call me when you can. It's about Mom." He set the phone aside and pulled up his contacts. He had numbers for investigators, prosecutors, journalists, federal regulators. 22 years on the bench had given him relationships across every agency that touched real estate law in the state. He had never used those relationships for personal reasons. Not once. He had built his career on fairness, on impartiality, on the belief that the law applied equally to everyone. But this wasn't about the law anymore. This was about his mother. This was about a man who evicted a 78-year-old widow on Christmas Eve and drove away without looking back. Gregory closed his laptop, walked to the window. Outside, snow was falling steadily now, blanketing the yard in white. Somewhere across town, his mother was driving through those same streets, alone, afraid, carrying everything she had left in a cardboard box. He picked up his phone and dialed a number he hadn't called in 6 years. The line rang twice. Then a voice, deep, gravelly, familiar. "Judge Calloway. Been a while." "Hello, Frank." Gregory kept his tone even. Professional. "I need a favor. A big one." Frank Delmore had been chief investigator at the State Housing Authority for 15 years. He and Gregory had crossed paths on a dozen cases: slumlords, predatory lenders, developers who cut corners and left tenants in danger. Frank was honest, thorough, and he owed Gregory for testimony that had helped put a corrupt property inspector behind bars. "Tell me what you need," Frank said. "Brashford Holdings LLC. I want a full audit. Every property, every lease, every eviction, every inspection report, everything." The pause. "Then, that's a big ask. Brashford has connections." "I'm aware." "This personal?" Gregory thought about his mother sitting in that parking lot. Thought about the Christmas cookies scattered across the floor. Thought about Harold's chair being photographed by strangers. "Yes," he said. "It's personal." Another pause. Longer this time. Then Frank spoke again, his voice lower now, harder. "I'll have my team on it by morning. Merry Christmas, Judge." The line went dead. Gregory stood alone in his office, phone in hand, snow falling outside the window. For 22 years he had delivered justice from behind a bench. He had sent men to prison. He had protected the vulnerable. He had believed, truly believed, that the system worked. Now the system had failed his mother. And Gregory Calloway was about to show Dominic Brashford what happened when you made an enemy of a man who knew every weakness in that system. His laptop pinged. An email notification. He glanced at the screen. The sender was the State Housing Authority. The subject line read, Audit request, Brashford Holdings LLC expedited. The message was short. Preliminary review flagged 17 irregularities. Full investigation authorized. Subpoenas will be issued December 26th. Gregory allowed himself a small breath. Not a smile. Not yet. But somewhere in his chest, something that had been coiled tight for hours began to loosen. This was just the beginning. Dominic Brashford woke on Christmas morning to the smell of fresh espresso and the sound of his own name on the television. He sat up in bed, silk sheets pooling around his waist, and stared at the 65-inch screen mounted on the wall of his master bedroom. A local news anchor was reading a story about holiday evictions. Stock footage of families carrying boxes. A quote from a tenant advocacy group. His name wasn't mentioned yet, but it would be. He could feel it coming. His wife, Vanessa, appeared in the doorway holding 2 ceramic mugs. She was 28 years old, blonde, a former pharmaceutical sales rep he had met at a charity auction 2 years ago. Their wedding had been featured in the lifestyle section of the Cedar Ridge Gazette. Coffee? She asked, not looking at the screen. Dominic took the mug without answering. His eyes stayed on the television until the segment ended and cut to commercial. His phone buzzed on the nightstand. A text from Councilman Ray Durbin. Call me. Urgent. Dominic frowned. Durbin never texted on Christmas. They had an understanding. Political favors were exchanged through proper channels, at proper times, with proper discretion. An urgent text on a holiday meant something had gone wrong. He ignored it. Whatever Durbin wanted could wait until after breakfast. The Brashford residence occupied 3 acres in Ashford Estates, the most exclusive gated community in the county. The house itself was 4,500 square feet, 6 bedrooms, a home theater, a wine cellar built to impress clients rather than to store wine. 2 sports cars sat in the garage. A 30-foot boat was docked at the marina, used twice since he bought it. Dominic had earned all of it. Every square foot. Every polished surface. He had started with nothing, a community college degree, a used pickup truck, and a willingness to do what others wouldn't. His first deal was a duplex on the south side of town. The previous owner, a widow named Martha Kinney, had fallen behind on her mortgage after her husband's death. Dominic bought the property at a foreclosure auction for 18 cents on the dollar. Evicted the remaining tenants. Renovated. Sold it for triple what he paid. He kept a framed photo of that duplex on his office desk. He called it his first win. That was 17 years ago. Now Brashford Holdings LLC owned properties across 3 counties. Strip malls. Apartment complexes. Single-family rentals. His business model was simple. Acquire distressed assets, remove obstacles, maximize returns. Tenants were obstacles. Especially long-term tenants paying below-market rent. Especially elderly tenants with outdated lease agreements that predated current rate structures. His assistant had a name for these cases, high-priority removals. Dominic called them something else, efficiency. He finished his coffee and checked his phone again. 3 more missed calls from Durbin. A text from his attorney, Garrett Sims, "We need to talk." Something was definitely wrong. He dialed Durbin's number. The councilman answered on the first ring. "Dominic." Durbin's voice was strained. "Tight. That eviction you did yesterday. The widow on Winthrop Lane. Do you know who she is?" Dominic leaned back against his headboard. "Some old woman. Husband dead. Been there for decades. Standard removal. Why?" "Her name is Meredith Calloway." "I know her name. It was on the paperwork." "Calloway, Dominic." Durbin's voice cracked. "Her son is Gregory Calloway." Dominic's grip tightened on the phone. "Calloway is a common name. Not this one." Durbin was almost whispering now. "Her son is Chief Circuit Judge Gregory Calloway. 22 years on the bench. Sent 3 state senators to prison. Dissolved the Haverford Development Group. Made the Reynolds family forfeit $40 million in a fraud case." Silence. Dominic's coffee cup slipped from his hand. Brown liquid splashed across the white marble floor, spreading in a dark stain around his feet. You evicted a judge's mother, Durbin continued. On Christmas Eve. From her home of 47 years. Do you understand what that means? Dominic's mouth had gone dry. He's a judge. He can't touch me. There's no case. He doesn't need a case. Durbin's laugh was hollow. Desperate. Gregory Calloway has relationships with every agency in this state. Housing. Labor. Environmental. One phone call, and auditors start showing up at your door. 2 phone calls, and your bank starts asking questions. 3 phone calls, and every deal you've ever made gets examined under a microscope. The room felt smaller suddenly. The silk sheets felt like sandpaper. What do I do? Dominic asked. I don't know. Durbin's voice hardened. But whatever you do, don't call me again. I can't be associated with this. The line went dead. Dominic sat motionless on his bed, phone in hand, staring at the stains spreading across his floor. He had built his empire on the assumption that vulnerable people couldn't fight back. That widows and veterans and single mothers didn't have the resources to challenge him in court. That the system was designed to protect people with money and punish people without it. He had never considered that one of those vulnerable people might have a son who had spent 2 decades learning how to use that system as a weapon. His phone buzzed again. This time it was Garrett Sims, his attorney. Dominic, we have a problem. I just got a call from a contact at the State Housing Authority. They're opening an audit. Full investigation. Every property. Every lease. Every eviction you've done in the past 7 years. Dominic's throat tightened. When? Subpoenas go out December 26th, tomorrow. He ended the call without responding. For a long moment, he sat in silence, surrounded by the trappings of his success, the silk sheets, the marble floors, the view of the manicured grounds through floor-to-ceiling windows. Then he picked up his phone and dialed Garrett back. Get me everything on Gregory Calloway, he said. Tax records, property filings, court complaints, ethics violations. Anything. Dominic, that's a sitting judge. If he finds out we're digging, I don't care. Dominic's voice was steady now. Cold. The fear had crystallized into something harder. If he wants a war, I'll find his weaknesses. Everyone has them. He hung up and walked to his window, looking out at the snow-covered lawn. Gregory Calloway thought he was untouchable. Thought his robes and his reputation made him invincible. Dominic Brashford had crushed untouchable men before. He would crush this one too. But as he stood there, watching the snow fall, a small voice in the back of his mind whispered something he hadn't felt in years. December 26th arrived under gray skies and freezing rain. Gregory Calloway was awake before dawn. He sat at his kitchen table with a legal pad, a pen, and 4 phone numbers written in neat columns. His daughters were still sleeping. His mother was in the guest room upstairs, finally resting after 2 days of exhaustion and tears. He made his first call at 6:30 a.m. Frank Delmore answered on the second ring. Judge, I was about to call you. My team pulled the preliminary files on Brashford Holdings last night. You're going to want to see this. How bad? Bad. Frank's voice was grim. Falsified inspection reports going back 5 years. Forged signatures on building certifications. At least 12 properties with code violations that were never addressed. And that's just what we found in the first pass. Gregory wrote quickly on his legal pad. What about the evictions? Pattern of targeting elderly tenants on fixed incomes. Security deposits withheld illegally. Lease termination clauses that violate state tenant protection statutes. Frank paused. And there's something else. That wrongful death case from 3 years ago, Walter Pembroke. I found the file. The family settled for $200,000. Signed an NDA. But my contact at the coroner's office pulled the original report. Pembroke died of hypothermia. He was evicted in January and spent 3 weeks living under an overpass before his heart gave out. Frank's voice dropped. Brashford's attorneys argued there was no direct causation. The judge bought it. Case dismissed before it reached a jury. Gregory's pen stopped moving. He stared at the name on his legal pad, Walter Pembroke. 69 years old. Evicted in winter. Dead within a month. That could have been his mother. Keep digging, Gregory said. I want everything. He ended the call and dialed the second number. Nina Castellanos answered from her office at 7 a.m. She never seemed to sleep. She was a forensic accountant, one of the best in the state, and she owed Gregory nothing. But she had built her career exposing financial fraud, and the name Brashford had crossed her desk before. Judge Calloway, I heard you might be calling. What do you know about Brashford Holdings? Enough to know their books don't add up. Nina's voice was crisp, professional. Shell companies in Delaware. Wire transfers to accounts in Cyprus. Revenue that appears and disappears between quarterly reports. I've been watching them for 2 years, but I've never had enough to justify a full investigation. You do now. The Housing Authority audit? That's just the beginning. Gregory leaned forward. I want you to follow the money, Nina. Every transaction. Every account. Every dollar that moved through Brashford's companies in the last decade. The pause. Then, this is personal for you. Yes. Good. Nina's tone hardened. Personal cases are the ones I win. Send me what you have. I'll start today. The third call went to Terence Okafor. Gregory had known Terence since law school. They had taken constitutional law together, argued about precedent over cheap beer, stayed in touch through the decades that followed. Terence had become one of the most respected investigative journalists in the state, specializing in exposing corporate wrongdoing. Gregory. Terence's voice was warm but cautious. I heard about your mother. I'm sorry. I need your help. Anything. Brashford Holdings has been targeting vulnerable tenants for years. Falsified records. Illegal evictions. At least one death that might be connected. The Housing Authority is opening an investigation, but that will take months. I need public pressure now. Terence was quiet for a moment. Then, you know I've been working on predatory landlords for 6 months. Brashford's name came up twice, but I could never get anyone to talk on the record. You'll have sources now. The audit will shake loose witnesses. Former tenants. Former employees. People who were too scared to speak before. And your mother? Gregory hesitated. She's not part of the story. Not directly. I don't want her name in print. Understood. Terence's voice shifted into professional mode. Send me what you have. I'll start making calls. The fourth call was the one Gregory had been dreading. He dialed the number and waited. Dominic Brashford answered on the third ring. His voice was clipped. Defensive. Who is this? Mr. Brashford. Gregory kept his tone level. Controlled. This is Judge Gregory Calloway. I believe we should talk. Silence on the other end. Gregory could almost hear the calculations happening, the fear warring with the arrogance. Finally, Dominic spoke. I know who you are. Then you know why I'm calling. Your mother signed a lease. The lease ended. I followed the law. You evicted a 78-year-old widow from her home of 47 years on Christmas Eve. Gregory's voice didn't rise. Didn't waver. You gave her 30 minutes to pack her belongings. You watched her sit in a church parking lot for 5 hours in the freezing cold because she had nowhere else to go. That's not I'm not finished. Gregory cut him off, his words precise as scalpels. I'm calling to give you an opportunity, Mr. Brashford. One opportunity. You have 72 hours to reverse the eviction, restore my mother to her home, and issue a formal written apology. Dominic laughed. It sounded forced. Or what? Or I will dedicate every resource at my disposal to ensuring that what you did to my mother, you never do to anyone else again. You're a judge. Dominic's voice had an edge now. Desperation masked as confidence. You can't touch me. There's no case here. I'm not talking about cases, Mr. Brashford. I'm talking about audits. Investigations. Forensic accountants examining every transaction you've ever made. Journalists interviewing every tenant you've ever evicted. Federal agencies asking questions about offshore accounts. The line went quiet. Gregory continued. I've spent 22 years in a courtroom. I've faced men who ordered executions. Men who ran drug empires. Men who bought politicians like children buy candy. He paused, letting the silence stretch. You're a landlord who evicts widows. You're not in my league. He heard Dominic's breathing on the other end, faster now, ragged. 72 hours, Mr. Brashford. Choose wisely. Gregory ended the call. He sat at his kitchen table for a long moment, staring at the legal pad covered in notes. For phone calls. For pieces of a machine now set in motion. Upstairs he heard footsteps. His mother's door opening. The soft shuffle of slippers on hardwood. He stood and walked to the base of the stairs. Meredith appeared at the top, wrapped in the robe she had worn since Harold's death. Her eyes were red. Her hands were shaking. Gregory? Her voice was small. Uncertain. I heard you on the phone. What's happening? He climbed the stairs and took her hands in his. Nothing you need to worry about, Mom. He kissed her forehead. Just making sure this never happens to anyone else. But even as he said it, his phone buzzed in his pocket. A text from Frank Delmore. You need to see this. Brashford's attorneys just filed a motion to quash the subpoenas. They're claiming harassment. And they're asking for an investigation into judicial misconduct. Gregory read the message twice. Dominic Brashford wasn't backing down. He was fighting back. The motion landed on Gregory's desk at 9:47 a.m. on December 27th. 14 pages. Filed by Garrett Sims, lead counsel for Brashford Holdings LLC. The language was sharp, aggressive, designed to wound. Abuse of judicial authority, personal vendetta, coordinated harassment campaign, demand for immediate investigation by the State Judicial Conduct Board. Gregory read every word. Twice. His expression never changed. Garrett Sims was good. Expensive. The kind of attorney who specialized in making problems disappear through paperwork and intimidation. He had represented oil companies accused of environmental violations, pharmaceutical executives facing fraud charges, developers who cut corners and left tenants in danger. He had never lost a case against a sitting judge. Because sitting judges didn't fight back. They couldn't afford the scrutiny. The ethical reviews. The headlines that could end careers even when the accusations were baseless. Gregory set the motion aside and picked up his phone. Frank, did you see it? I saw it. Frank Delmore's voice was tight. They're trying to shut down the audit before it starts. Claiming the investigation is politically motivated. Will it work? Not a chance. The housing authority is independent. We don't answer to Brashford's lawyers. Frank paused. But you need to be careful, Gregory. If this goes to the Judicial Conduct Board, they'll examine every call you made. Every contact. Every relationship. I know. Do you? Frank's tone sharpened. You've spent 22 years building a reputation for impartiality. One headline suggesting you used your position for personal gain, and that reputation is gone. Doesn't matter if it's true. Doesn't matter if Brashford is guilty of everything we think he's guilty of. The story will be about you. Gregory looked out his office window. Snow was falling again, thick and heavy, blanketing the courthouse grounds. I understand the risk. And you're still moving forward? Yes. Frank sighed. Then we better make sure we win. At 2:15 p.m., Gregory received a call from the State Judicial Conduct Board. The voice on the other end was professional, neutral, carefully devoid of any indication of sympathy or accusation. Judge Calloway, we've received a formal complaint regarding your conduct in relation to Brashford Holdings LLC. As per standard procedure, we're opening a preliminary inquiry. You'll receive a written notice within 5 business days. In the meantime, we advise you to avoid any further contact with the complainant or any parties involved in the related civil matters. Gregory thanked the caller, hung up, and sat in silence for a full minute. The machine was turning against him now. Every favor he had called in, every relationship he had leveraged, all of it was being weaponized by a man who had made his fortune exploiting the vulnerable. This was the cost of fighting back. He had known it from the beginning. But sitting in that same office, looking at the photograph of Rebecca on his wall, he remembered something she had said 3 days before she died. Promise me you'll keep being the man I married. The one who does what's right, even when it costs everything. He had promised. And he intended to keep that promise. His phone rang. A known number. He answered. Judge Calloway. The voice was unfamiliar, smooth, confident in a way that suggested expensive suits and offshore bank accounts. My name is Garrett Sims. I represent Dominic Brashford. I'm aware. Then you're aware that my client has filed a formal complaint against you with the Judicial Conduct Board. And you're aware that pursuing this personal crusade will only make things worse for you. Gregory said nothing. Sims continued. I'm calling to offer you an off-ramp. Drop the audit request. Withdraw your involvement. Let this matter resolve itself through proper legal channels. In exchange, my client will withdraw his complaint and issue a private apology to your mother. A private apology. That's correct. For publicly evicting her on Christmas Eve. It's a generous offer, Judge. More generous than most in your position would receive. Gregory leaned back in his chair. His voice was calm. Almost pleasant. Mr. Sims, I've been a judge for 22 years. I've presided over 2,000 cases. I've sent corrupt officials to prison. I've dissolved corporations that exploited their workers. I've returned millions of dollars to families who were stolen from. He paused. In all that time, I've never once used my position for personal gain. I've never once asked for a favor I didn't earn. I've never once let my personal feelings interfere with my professional judgment. Another pause. Longer this time. But you made a mistake, Mr. Sims. You and your client. You assumed that because I play by the rules, I don't know how to fight. He heard Sims shift on the other end of the line. The confidence was slipping. I know every loophole in every statute your client has ever exploited. I know every agency that oversees every property he's ever owned. I know every journalist who has ever investigated predatory landlords in this state. Gregory's voice dropped to just above a whisper. And I know that your client has a forensic accountant examining every offshore transaction he's ever made. Right now. As we speak. Silence. So here's my counteroffer, Mr. Sims. Tell your client he had 72 hours to make this right. That window is now closed. The audit will proceed. The investigation will proceed. And when the evidence comes out, and it will come out, your client will face the consequences of every eviction, every falsified report, every life he's destroyed. Gregory stood, walked to his window, watched the snow falling on the courthouse steps. Tell your client one more thing. Tell him he picked the wrong woman. Because he picked the wrong woman's son. He ended the call without waiting for a response. For a long moment, he stood motionless, phone in hand, breath fogging the cold glass. Then his phone buzzed. A text from Terrence Okafor. Got something big. Former Brashford employee willing to talk on record. She has documents. Emails. Internal memos. Everything. Gregory typed back. When can we meet? The response came immediately. Tomorrow. 8 a.m. She's scared, Gregory. Brashford threatened her job, her family. She says there's something else, something bigger than the evictions. Something he's been hiding for years. Gregory stared at the message. Something bigger. He thought about Dominic Brashford sitting in his mansion in Ashford Estates, surrounded by lawyers and money and the confidence of a man who had never faced real consequences. That confidence was about to be tested, because somewhere in those documents, in those emails, in those internal memos, was the key to bringing down everything Dominic Brashford had built. And Gregory Calloway was going to find it. The woman sitting across from Gregory Calloway was shaking. Her name was Priscilla Dunmore. 41 years old. Former office manager for Brashford Holdings LLC. She had worked for Dominic Brashford for 6 years before resigning 8 months ago, the same week her doctor diagnosed her with stress-induced hypertension. Now she sat in a booth at a diner 30 miles outside Cedar Ridge, clutching a manila folder thick with documents. Her coffee sat untouched. Her eyes kept darting to the door. They threaten my daughter, she said. Her voice was barely above a whisper. 3 days after I gave notice, a man showed up at her school. Just stood outside the fence, watching. Didn't say anything. Didn't have to. Gregory leaned forward. Who sent him? I don't know his name. But I know who paid him. Priscilla's hands tightened on the folder. Dominic doesn't handle problems himself. He has people for that. Lawyers. Accountants. And when lawyers and accountants aren't enough. She trailed off. Swallowed. There are others. Terence Okafor sat beside Gregory, recorder running, notebook open. He had been chasing this story for 6 months. Now he was finally getting the answers he needed. Tell us about the documents, Terence said gently. Priscilla opened the folder. Inside were printouts of emails, spreadsheets, internal memos. She spread them across the table like evidence at a crime scene. This is everything I copied before I left. I knew someday someone would come asking. She pointed to a spreadsheet. This is the real ledger. The one Dominic kept separate from the official books. It shows every property, every eviction, every payment that never made it to the tax filings. Gregory studied the numbers. His jaw tightened. The Cyprus account, he said. Priscilla nodded. $4.7 million over 7 years. All of it hidden. All of it illegal. Terence flipped through the emails. His expression shifted from curiosity to disbelief to something close to horror. These memos, he said slowly, they're instructions. Specific instructions for targeting elderly tenants. Fixed incomes. No family contacts. Limited mobility. He looked up at Priscilla. He was hunting them. He called them soft targets. Priscilla's voice cracked. Said they were the easiest to remove. Said they never fought back. Gregory thought about his mother. 78 years old. Fixed income. No family contacts listed on her lease because she had been too proud to burden her children with her address. A soft target. There's something else. Priscilla pulled out a single sheet of paper from the bottom of the stack. This is why I really left. Gregory took the paper. Read it. Read it again. It was an internal memo dated January 2021. The subject line read, Pembroke Property Resolution. The memo outlined a strategy for handling the Walter Pembroke situation, the elderly tenant who had died of exposure after being evicted from a Brashford property. But it wasn't a legal strategy. It wasn't a public relations strategy. It was a cover-up. The memo detailed payments to a coroner's assistant to alter the cause of death on the official report. Payments to a local journalist to kill a story. Payments to Pembroke's family to sign an NDA and disappear. He knew, Gregory said quietly. He knew Pembroke was dying. He knew the eviction would kill him. And he did it anyway. Priscilla nodded. Tears were streaming down her face now. I typed that memo myself. I didn't understand what it meant at the time. But when I figured it out, she wiped her eyes with the back of her hand. I couldn't sleep. I couldn't eat. I kept seeing that old man's face. Kept wondering if he had children. If anyone was looking for him. Gregory placed his hand over hers. Steady. Reassuring. You did the right thing, Priscilla. Coming forward. Sharing this. She looked up at him. Her eyes were red, exhausted, but there was something else there now. Relief. I've been carrying this for 8 months. Waiting for someone to ask the right questions. She squeezed his hand. Make him pay, Judge. For Walter Pembroke. For your mother. For all of them. Gregory gathered the documents carefully. Placed them in his briefcase. I intend to. He stood to leave. But before he reached the door, Priscilla called out one more time. Judge Calloway. Her voice was urgent. There's one more thing. The man who showed up at my daughter's school. I saw him again last week. Outside your mother's old house on Winthrop Lane. Gregory froze. He was taking photographs. Of the house. Of the neighbors. Of everyone who came and went. She paused. Her voice dropped to barely a whisper. Dominic isn't just fighting back. He's building a case against you. And he's willing to do whatever it takes to win. Gregory walked out of the diner into the gray morning light. The parking lot was empty except for his car and Terence's. His phone buzzed. A text from his brother Owen. Flight lands tonight. We need to talk. It's urgent. Gregory stared at the message. Owen never used the word urgent unless he meant it. Whatever was coming next, it was bigger than audits and investigations. Dominic Brashford was escalating. And Gregory Calloway needed to be ready. The headline hit like a thunderclap. January 15th, front page of the Cedar Ridge Gazette. Bold black letters that seemed to scream from every newsstand, every phone screen, every television in the county. Predatory landlord exposed. Pattern of illegal evictions, falsified records, and hidden millions. Terrence Okafor had done his job well. The story was comprehensive, devastating, impossible to ignore. It named Dominic Brashford. It named his companies. It detailed the falsified inspection reports, the illegal security deposit withholdings, the pattern of targeting vulnerable tenants. And buried in paragraph 12, exactly where Gregory had requested. Among those recently evicted was Meredith Calloway, 78, a widow who had lived in her home for 47 years. Her son, Chief Circuit Judge Gregory Calloway, declined to comment. By noon, the story had been picked up by 3 state news outlets. By evening, it was national. Dominic Brashford watched the coverage from his office at Brashford Holdings, blinds drawn, phone silenced. His attorney Garrett Sims had called 17 times. His accountant Beverly Thornton had called 12. His wife Vanessa had called once, from her lawyer's office. She was filing for divorce. She wanted half of everything. The irony wasn't lost on him. He had spent 20 years building an empire by taking things from other people. Now everything was being taken from him. His phone buzzed again. This time he looked at the screen. A known number. He answered. Mr. Brashford. The voice was calm, professional, unfamiliar. My name is Sloan. I understand you have a problem. Dominic straightened in his chair. Who gave you this number? That's not important. What's important is that I solve problems. Complicated problems. Problems that lawyers and accountants can't fix. I'm listening. Meet me tomorrow. Private airstrip outside Millbrook. 9 a.m. Come alone. The line went dead. Dominic stared at his phone for a long moment. He knew what this was. He had heard rumors over the years. Men who operated outside the system, who made problems disappear for the right price. He had never needed such men before. His lawyers had always been enough. But his lawyers couldn't stop a judge with a personal vendetta. His lawyers couldn't unpublish a front-page story. His lawyers couldn't erase the evidence that was now in the hands of federal investigators. The next morning, Dominic drove to the airstrip alone. Sloan was waiting beside a black sedan. He was tall, lean, gray hair cropped close to his skull. His suit was expensive but understated. His eyes were the color of slate, flat, unreadable, patient. Mr. Brashford. Sloan extended his hand. Thank you for coming. What exactly do you do? I assess situations. I identify vulnerabilities. I create solutions. Sloan's expression didn't change. Your situation is complicated. Federal investigation. State audit. National media coverage. A sitting judge coordinating the entire effort. Can you make it go away? No. Sloan's voice was matter-of-fact. The evidence is too extensive. The media attention is too intense. You're going to face charges. That's inevitable. Dominic's face fell. Then why am I here? Because there's a difference between facing charges and facing consequences. Sloan stepped closer. Right now, Gregory Calloway is the engine driving this entire campaign against you. Remove him from the equation, and the pressure decreases. Witnesses become reluctant. Investigators lose urgency. Prosecutors start looking for plea deals instead of maximum sentences. Remove him how? Sloan's lips curved slightly. Not quite a smile. Discredit him. Find something, anything, that creates doubt about his motives. An affair. A financial irregularity. A conflict of interest. If nothing exists, we create something that appears to exist. He paused. Accusations don't have to be true to be damaging, Mr. Brashford. They just have to be loud. Dominic thought about it. Thought about everything he stood to lose. The properties. The money. The reputation he had spent decades building. And then he thought about Meredith Calloway. The photograph on her coffee table. The tears on her face. The way she had clutched that picture of her dead husband like it was the only thing keeping her alive. For just a moment, one fleeting moment, something human flickered in his chest. Then he remembered the headline. The federal subpoenas. The divorce papers. The flicker died. Do it, he said. Whatever it takes. 3 days later, Sloan called with an update. We've been surveilling the judge for 72 hours. His home. His office. His movements. Sloan's voice was tight, frustrated, almost impressed. There's nothing, Mr. Brashford. 22 years on the bench and the man is clean. No affairs. No financial irregularities. Not even a parking ticket. There has to be something. There isn't. Sloan paused. But there's another option. One you're not going to like. Tell me. We go after the family. Silence. The judge has 2 daughters. 14 and 11. His mother is staying at his house. His brother is military intelligence, currently on leave. Sloan's voice remained level. Pressure on the family creates pressure on the judge. People make mistakes when they're worried about the people they love. Dominic gripped his phone tighter. This was different. This was crossing a line he had never crossed before. But he was desperate now. Trapped. Watching everything he had built collapse around him. Do it, he whispered. Whatever it takes. What would you have done in Dominic's position? When everything you built starts falling apart, do you fight or do you run? Drop your answer in the comments. The next morning, Gregory Calloway noticed a car parked outside his house. Black sedan. Tinted windows. Engine idling. He watched it for 10 minutes from his kitchen window. It didn't move. He didn't tell his daughters. Didn't tell his mother. But he made a phone call. His brother Owen answered on the first ring. I see them too, Owen said. I've been watching from the coffee shop across the street. Professional surveillance team. 3 vehicles rotating in shifts. How do you know they're professional? Because I used to train people like them. Owen's voice hardened. Big brother, you've got a serious problem. This isn't some lawyer playing games. Someone hired contractors. Real ones. Gregory's blood ran cold. Dominic Brashford wasn't just fighting back anymore. He was declaring war. Owen Calloway moved like a ghost. 44 years old. 15 years Army intelligence. 3 combat deployments. A decade of operations that would never appear in any official record. He had arrived in Cedar Ridge the night before, checked into a motel under a false name, and spent the next 12 hours mapping the surveillance team watching his brother's house. 3 vehicles. 6 operatives. Rotating 12-hour shifts. Professional. Expensive. Dangerous. Owen had dealt with men like this before. In places with names most Americans couldn't pronounce. The tactics were the same everywhere. Isolate the target, identify vulnerabilities, apply pressure until something broke. They were trying to break Gregory. Owen wasn't going to let that happen. At 6:47 a.m., he made his move. The operative in the black sedan had been parked outside the elementary school for 30 minutes, watching Harper's school bus route, taking photographs, recording license plates. He was good, careful, but not careful enough. Owen appeared at his window without warning. Just materialized there, like he had stepped out of thin air. The operative reached for something under his jacket. I wouldn't, Owen said calmly. His voice was quiet, conversational. The kind of voice that made dangerous men freeze. 2 fingers. Slowly. Place your hands on the steering wheel. The operative hesitated, assessed, then complied. Good. Owen leaned against the car door, arms crossed. Now we're going to have a conversation. You're going to tell me who hired you, what your objectives are, and how many men are on this operation. I don't know what you're talking about. Owen smiled. It wasn't a friendly smile. Let me explain something. I've spent 15 years doing things that would make your worst nightmares look like children's bedtime stories. I've interrogated men in basements with no electricity. I've extracted confessions from people who swore they would die before talking. He leaned closer. You're sitting outside an elementary school, photographing children. You have exactly 30 seconds to convince me not to treat you like a threat to my family. The operative swallowed. His confidence was cracking. "Sloan," he said finally. "The contractor's name is Sloan. Private intelligence. He was hired by someone named Brashford to put pressure on a judge." "What kind of pressure?" "Surveillance. Documentation. Find something we can use." "If there's nothing to find." The operative trailed off. "You create something." Silence. Owen straightened up. His expression hadn't changed, but something shifted in his eyes, a coldness that made the operative shrink back against his seat. "Here's what's going to happen. You're going to call your boss. You're going to tell him the operation is compromised. You're going to tell him that if any member of my family is approached, followed, or photographed again, I will personally ensure that every federal agency with a 3-letter acronym learns exactly what Sloan's operation involves." He paused. "Let the words sink in. And then you're going to tell him something else. Tell him that threatening a federal judge's family is a felony. Tell him that conspiracy to intimidate a witness is a federal crime. Tell him that the men he hired are now evidence in an ongoing investigation." The operative's face had gone pale. "Do you understand?" A nod. Barely perceptible. "Good." Owen stepped back from the car. "You have 1 hour to leave this county. If I see your face again, any of your faces, we won't be having a conversation. We'll be having a very different kind of meeting." He turned and walked away. Didn't look back. 2 hours later, Sloan called Dominic Brashford. "We're pulling out." Dominic's voice cracked. "What do you mean pulling out? We had a deal." "The deal is off. Your judge has a brother in Army intelligence. 15 years. 3 deployments. The kind of background that makes my team nervous." Sloan's voice was flat. Professional. Final. "My operatives were made this morning. One of them was confronted directly outside an elementary school. The brother knows our methods, our protocols, our vulnerabilities. So find new operatives. Hire someone else." "You don't understand, Mr. Brashford. This isn't a setback. This is a fundamental problem." Sloan paused. "I take difficult jobs. I don't take suicide missions. Gregory Calloway isn't just a judge with connections. He's a judge with a brother who knows how to fight dirty. And right now, that brother is compiling evidence on everyone involved in this operation. You can't just abandon me." "I'm not abandoning you. I'm giving you advice." Sloan's voice hardened. "Run. Liquidate whatever you can. Leave the country. Because in approximately 72 hours, federal agents are going to knock on your door with a warrant. And there's nothing I can do to stop that." The line went dead. Dominic sat alone in his office, phone in hand, staring at the wall. 20 years. 20 years of building, of acquiring, of winning, gone. All because of one widow, one eviction, one Christmas Eve. His phone buzzed. An email notification. He looked at the screen. The sender was the Federal Bureau of Investigation. The subject line read, "Interview request, Brashford Holdings LLC." His hands started shaking. It was over. The knock came at 6:15 a.m. Dominic Brashford was still in his bathrobe when he opened the front door of his home in Ashford Estates. He had been awake for 37 hours. His eyes were bloodshot. His hands trembled as he turned the handle. 4 men stood on his doorstep. Dark suits. Stern faces. The leader held up a badge. "Dominic Brashford? FBI. You're under arrest for tax fraud, wire fraud, falsifying federal documents, and conspiracy to intimidate a federal officer." The handcuffs clicked around his wrists. Cold. Final. His neighbors had gathered on their porches. The same neighbors who had attended his parties, who had shaken his hand at charity galas, who had told him what a great man he was. Now they watched in silence as federal agents led him to a waiting SUV. No one looked away. No one offered help. No one said a word. Dominic Brashford had spent 20 years building an empire on the assumption that money could protect him from consequences, that lawyers could shield him from accountability, that power could insulate him from justice. He was wrong. The federal case against Brashford Holdings LLC moved faster than anyone expected. Prosecutors had everything: the falsified inspection reports, the illegal security deposit withholdings, the offshore accounts in Cyprus, the internal memos detailing the cover-up of Walter Pembroke's death. And they had witnesses. Priscilla Dunmore testified for 3 hours, her voice steady, her documents authenticated. Former tenants came forward, the disabled veteran who had lost everything, the single mother who had lived in her car for 3 weeks, the family of the man who had died under an overpass. One by one they told their stories. And one by one, the jurors' faces hardened. Gregory Calloway did not attend the trial. He couldn't. The case had been assigned to a different judge specifically to avoid any appearance of conflict of interest. But he followed every development, read every transcript, watched every news report. This wasn't about revenge. It never had been. It was about ensuring that what happened to his mother, what happened to Walter Pembroke, would never happen to anyone else. The verdict came on a Thursday afternoon in April. Guilty. 15 counts. Tax fraud. Wire fraud. Falsifying federal documents. Conspiracy. The jury had deliberated for less than 4 hours. The sentencing followed 3 weeks later. 14 years federal prison. Asset forfeiture of all properties owned by Brashford Holdings LLC. Restitution payments to 67 former tenants. As the marshals led Dominic away, he turned to look at the gallery one final time. He was searching for something. Sympathy, maybe. Understanding. Acknowledgement that he was still human. He found only the faces of people he had dismissed, ignored, evicted. People he had called soft targets. People whose lives he had destroyed for profit. They watched him go in silence. Justice finally delivered. Meredith Calloway came home on a Tuesday in March. The house on Winthrop Lane looked exactly as she remembered. The same brick exterior. The same hardwood floors Harold had installed in 1982. The same porch where she had watched her children play, where she had said goodbye to her husband for the last time. Gregory had purchased the building outright 3 months earlier. He had converted it to a non-profit housing trust, a guarantee that no tenant would ever be evicted for profit again. And he had made sure his mother could live there for the rest of her life. Rent-free. Protected. Meredith stood in the doorway, tears streaming down her face. Everything was exactly where she had left it. The ceramic nativity scene on the mantel. Harold's recliner in the corner. The photograph of their wedding day on the coffee table. Gregory had recovered it all. Every box the movers had taken. Every piece of her life that Dominic Brashford had tried to erase. "I don't know how to thank you," she whispered. Gregory put his arm around her shoulders. "You don't have to thank me, Mom. You raised me. Everything I am, everything I've done, started with you." Behind them, Owen stood in the doorway with Gregory's daughters. Cecilia, 14 now, held her grandmother's Bible, the one Meredith had clutched in the parking lot of Grace Methodist Church on the worst night of her life. Harper, 11, carried the ceramic angel from the top of the Christmas tree. "Welcome home, Grandma," Harper said. Meredith pulled them all close. Her sons. Her granddaughters. The family she had tried so hard to protect from her troubles. She understood now that protection wasn't about hiding. It wasn't about carrying burdens alone. It was about trusting the people who loved you to stand beside you when everything fell apart. That December, the house on Winthrop Lane glowed with light. The same string lights Harold had hung in 1979 stretched across the porch. The ceramic nativity scene sat on the mantel, exactly where it had sat for 47 years. The angel ornament hung from the highest branch of the tree. Gregory arrived on Christmas Eve with his daughters. Owen flew in from Fort Bragg, his first holiday home in 3 years. Neighbors stopped by with cookies and casseroles. The same neighbors who had watched in silence a year ago, now eager to apologize, to explain, to make amends. Meredith forgave them all. She understood fear. She understood what it meant to feel powerless against someone with money and influence. She understood because she had felt it herself. But she also understood something else now. Something Dominic Brashford had never learned. Power wasn't about money. It wasn't about properties or connections or the ability to make problems disappear. Power was about love. About family. About the people who would fight for you when you couldn't fight for yourself. Dominic Brashford had spent 20 years accumulating wealth. But he had never accumulated the only thing that mattered. And in the end, that was why he lost. After dinner, Gregory found his mother sitting alone on the porch, wrapped in a blanket, watching the snow fall. "You okay?" he asked, settling into the chair beside her. "I was just thinking about your father." Meredith smiled softly. "He would have been so proud of you, Gregory. The way you handled everything. The way you fought for me. I learned from you, both of you." She reached over and took his hand. "I spent so long trying to protect you from my problems. I thought I was being strong. But I was really just being afraid." She squeezed his fingers. "You showed me that asking for help isn't weakness. It's trust." Gregory looked at his mother, 78 years old, white hair, hands still trembling from arthritis, heart still skipping beats. But her eyes were clear. Her voice was steady. And for the first time in years, she looked at peace. "Mom, can I tell you something?" "Anything." "When Rebecca died, I thought I would never feel whole again. I thought I would spend the rest of my life just going through the motions, working, parenting, surviving." He paused. "But this past year, fighting for you, protecting our family, it reminded me why I became a judge in the first place. It reminded me that justice isn't just about cases and courtrooms. It's about people. About making sure the vulnerable are protected and the powerful are held accountable." Meredith wiped her eyes. "Your father used to say something similar. He said the measure of a man isn't what he accumulates. It's what he defends." Gregory nodded slowly. "I think I finally understand what he meant." They sat together in comfortable silence, watching the snow blanket the yard in white. Inside, Harper was laughing at something Owen had said. Cecilia was teaching her grandmother's old carol to anyone who would listen. The house was full of noise and warmth and life. Everything Dominic Brashford had tried to destroy. Everything that had survived. Some people see an elderly widow and think, easy target. They forget that widows have children. And children have memories. And memories have a way of becoming consequences. Dominic Brashford learned that lesson too late. He sat now in a federal prison cell, stripped of his properties, his money, his reputation. The empire he had spent 20 years building was gone. The name that had once commanded respect now commanded only contempt. He had made one mistake. One fatal error in judgment. He had assumed that vulnerable people had no power. He had never considered that a widow in a modest house might have a son who had spent 2 decades delivering justice. He had never imagined that cruelty, especially cruelty at Christmas, could awaken forces far beyond his control. And he had never learned the oldest lesson of all. You never truly know who someone is, or who loves them. Meredith Calloway would live out her remaining years in the house on Winthrop Lane, surrounded by family, protected by a son who had moved mountains to bring her home. She would hang those same Christmas lights every December. She would place that same ceramic nativity scene on the mantel. She would bake sugar cookies for the mail carrier and wave to neighbors from her porch. And she would never forget the lesson her own ordeal had taught her. That the strongest people aren't the ones who never need help. They're the ones brave enough to ask for it. If this story moved you, subscribe and turn on notifications. Because next week, we have another one. A CO fires a janitor on Christmas morning, not knowing the janitor's daughter just became the state attorney general. You don't want to miss it. Drop a comment below and tell me, what part of this story hit you the hardest? Was it the moment Meredith broke down in that parking lot? The confrontation between Gregory and Dominic? The look on Brashford's face when the handcuffs clicked? Share your thoughts. Inspire someone else. Because stories like this remind us that justice isn't just a word. It's a promise. And karma? Karma doesn't need your address. It already knows where you live.